Good morning, everyone. I cannot tell you how excited I am to be sitting here with these legends of the wine industry. My name is Jackie Summers, and I'm going to be moderating today our panel for Live Collective on equity and inclusion in the wine industry. Again, the people that we're looking at, the people we're talking to today, have such august careers and such strong voices. We're going to let everyone introduce themselves and their notability, their highlights, and then we're going to get into this conversation and sit back because we're going to go deep and hard today. Miguel, can we start with you? Can you tell the good folks who you are and what you do?
For sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Miguel. I'm based in New York. He, him. I'm the wine director for a small restaurant called Pinch Chinese. But before that, I've worked at a couple other places, most notably Momofuku and Chez Panisse. I would consider myself an educator as well, but I write mostly about wine and the intersection on wine, its human impacts, and consequences and interventions for Punch and for Bon Appetit. That's a very quick version of what I am, of what I do now. But I'm sure as we get through the panel, we'll get through a lot more of these kind of consequences of how we all got here because of this. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Hi, can you tell the good folks who you are and what you do?
Certainly. My name is Tran. I'm based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was, before the pandemic, the wine director for a luxury steakhouse called Barclay Prime. And for that, I had worked in numerous five-star, five-diamond properties. And right now, I'm full-time dad. That's kind of a big thing for me this past year. And also, I'm a contributing sommelier for an organization known as Summation Live. We do a lot of kind of virtual platform education, discussion talks through Instagram, as well as other virtual events. I have to say I'm really excited to be on this panel because, as I'll share later, Miguel's early works really kind of influenced a lot of like what I think about, the topic we're talking about today, but also, so.
Thank you so much, Hi. Alpana, can you please introduce yourself to the good folks who you are, what you do?
Hi, everyone. Greetings from Chicago, where it's no longer snowing. Based in Chicago for about 20 years, but I'm originally from Monterey, California, a small little town on the West Coast that has an interesting legacy when it comes to producing master sommeliers. And as such, I, at the age of 21, passed my advanced exam, and then at the age of 26, became the youngest woman and first woman of color to become a master sommelier. I moved to Chicago to take over the wine program at a pretty fancy restaurant. And then what else? And then I went on to open my own restaurants. I opened 3 restaurants, currently the owner of just 1. I also host a TV show here in Chicago called Check Please that focuses around restaurants. And then in addition to that, I'm a international speaker. I talk about life and wine and how anyone can become an expert. And up until last November, I was a master sommelier, and then renounced my title, which I'm sure, Jackie, you're going to ask about.
Yes, we will get to that. Thank you so much. Dr. Hoby, can you please tell us about yourself and let the good folks know you are, what you do?
Hey, thank you so much, Jackie, and so great to be with all of you on this panel. It's a real honor. My name's Hoby Wedler. I was born completely blind in Northern California, grew up in wine country, and love things that are hyper-local around me. So I got excited about wine very early on. I got excited about the fact that something was being put into grown in my backyard, basically, and then put into a bottle and sold all around the world as this premium good. I thought I got to get to know more about this. And I ended up taking a couple of winemaking classes out at UC Davis. I didn't study wine at all, but my alma mater is the University of California, Davis, both for undergraduate and graduate work, and fell in love with wine as I learned more. Fell into a career while in graduate school, actually working with Francis Ford Coppola as a wine education platform for their sales team and hospitality teams, doing truly blindfolded wine tastings. Took getting a PhD in chemistry to realize maybe I wanted to have a full-time career in something other than chemistry. And now I'm an entrepreneur in the wine industry and really in the food and beverage industry overall. Love what I do. Love the people in this industry, and love to have this ability to have this great conversation with the good folks on this call.
Thank you all so much. And if I stumble a little bit today, I'm a little starstruck. I mean, there's serious talent here today, and we appreciate you all taking your time. But let's not waste any time. Let's get into the meat of this. Often, equity and inclusion is seen as a black and white thing, but we've got a really diverse group of people on our screen. Can we just go around the room and talk about your particular experience with equity and inclusion in our industry? Anyone can start.
I'll go ahead and grab the baton, I guess. Yeah, so being a blind guy in a sighted world and in a mostly sighted industry, it's interesting because I really have to show people, and I don't use the word have to. I should say I get to show people, what's possible, what I can do, and the fact that maybe you don't need to see the color of wine to be able to really figure out what's going on in that glass and what's going on in the wine itself. And it's often surprising to people that I can pour a glass of wine to the proper level just by sound. But it's just to me it's not surprising because it's kind of what I do, and I've learned it over time as an individual. To me, inclusion is all about thinking in terms of customization. So you can't be a generalist and be inclusionary. You have to be able to think outside the box and what really works for me. And then it's our job. We can't expect everyone to know what works for us. And I think a lot of people make that mistake, if you want to know the truth. So it's about teaching what works for us and what the best way is to communicate with us and work with, no matter what we are. And just show people that. And if people embrace that, they usually will. It's like, hey, thank you for explaining what works the best for you. This is great. This is helpful. And, then we don't have to be upset with people for just not getting it, the ability to teach people what works for us. And that's my view. And in terms of diversity in the industry, man, every industry is going to be more lucrative, frankly, if we're more diverse, because we have more perspectives at the table and a better, more unified way of solving problems.
Agree completely.
Yeah, so I want to kind of share, I guess, my experience a little bit in the beverage industry. I'm Vietnamese American. My parents came over after the Vietnam War ended. They met here, they got married, and lo and behold, I popped out a few years later, right? But I was always kind of raised because of the fact that I came from kind of that immigrant background, and being welcomed to a country and being invited and trying to make a new life, if you will. In a new country, my parents always kind of taught me, and kind of I looking back, I realized how much they tried to steer me toward this idea of what an American lifestyle was, and a lot of that had to do with assimilation. I never thought how bad a term assimilation was until I really thought about what I lost in the process of assimilation, and then what I had to deal with as I try to assimilate in a different world. And I totally agree. Assimilation is a form of erasure in some ways, because of the fact that I tried my best to learn the culture, the American culture. As I was growing up, I tell everybody I learned English by watching MacGyver and the Jetsons. And that's how I learned English. I watched a lot of TV, and because my parents didn't speak much English, but they forced it upon us to learn as much as we could. And they tried to speak English to us when they could. And as a result, I lost a little bit of my culture as I grew up. And when I look back on that, I feel really horrible that, that I don't speak as well in Vietnamese as I should. I do understand a lot, but also at the same time, for a long time, I suppressed a lot of that culture. I suppressed a lot of the food, like when I was packing food and bringing it into for elementary school or middle school lunches, I was very ashamed about the smells and stuff that were coming out of my lunchbox. And people not being able to recognize that, and that also translated into once we, fast forwarding to my career, when we talk about when we're tasting wines and so on and so forth, right? I was taught that there's this grid and you follow these things and you check these boxes and these are the things you talk about. But I was like, I don't know what these things are, but I know what this is. Can I use this term? And then I can't imagine how it was when I went to my first taste group and I was told that we don't know what that is. So can you use a different term? and it felt like it was like suppressing, like my culture and what I understood and and the subjective part that comes with tasting. And then also at the same time, it comes also like, understanding food and flavors and so forth, and try and bring that into the conversation. That can be a little different conversation if people are not open to it. So, through, becoming an adult and so forth, I learned that, that assimilation maybe is not the best thing for, someone that is maybe of a different culture or a different background, so forth. And part of being inclusive and, provide equity is welcoming all those different viewpoints to the table. Like Dr. Hoby said,
We've got our first tech freeze. So how about we pick up with Alpana? Can you just give us a little bit about what your experience was like when we wait for Hunt to come back?
Actually, a lot of it was echoed with I just said. This world that we're in, and not just talking about the wine world, just the world in general, is not calibrated if you are not Eurocentric, white male. And it's something that if you are like I'm South Asian descent. My parents are from the Fiji Islands. I grew up, child of immigrants, but I was born and raised, in the United States. But nonetheless, that insidious programming and messaging that you don't fit in, comes at a very, very early age psychologically. That groundwork is laid. And, we have to keep in mind that when we enter the workforce, that wiring is still there. And so for many years, starting off in the industry, I came with this wiring that anything that I'm bringing to the table is not going to fit, that I have to ignore all of that, erase it, right? And basically start with their template. I have to work with their template. And for an industry that advocates for terroir, for respecting a sense of place and where something comes from and how unique it is when it's the soil and the aspect and the slope and, the nutrients and what have you, we're basically asked to ignore our own terroir. And basically, it's like the analogy of, your Cabernet, but they're trying to plant you in Burgundy, right? And what I've had to do, and this is just a recent journey, and it's only the courtesy and privilege of success that I've been able to do this, is I've had to undo a lot of that wiring and basically realize that all that sort of like point of view that came from my heritage, that came from my culture, that came from my upbringing and my background, as a South Asian woman, there's a place for it. It adds value and there's a contribution that can be added. But it doesn't come without sort of this, like I said, you're just kind of this square peg going into this round hole. And what's interesting is that, it's not an easy thing, but I feel that once you kind of, understand that just because you don't currently see it doesn't necessarily mean that it shouldn't exist.
Right. Miguel, I saw you nodding your head. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mentioned a similar journey, I would say, in terms of what Alpana and Hai have gone through. I'm an immigrant myself. I moved to the US without papers when I was 10 years old. I thought that I was going to be here for a summer vacation. Turns out that vacation has lasted 26 years. And I'm in New York now, so it's been a very extended one. What's come to light, I think most especially recently, is this idea that the systems in wine and the things that get us these packets of information in our heads are the ones that are most resistant to change. And we have to kind of question why that is. And it's because, someone wants to either continue a point of view that's oppressive, or maybe they don't understand it is. They have a point of view that completely, like Alpana said, has completely disregarded the humanity of someone else, and not just humanity, but like the whole spectrum of their own humanity. I always liken our experience to our own obsession with grapes, right? Like if we as folks, as Homo sapiens, can be so obsessed with like the minutia of a thing called vitis vinifera, and not just that, in the way that, not just in terroir, but in variety, right? We're obsessed with at the end of the day, it's a grape, right? Right? Like it's a grape. That's what it is. Just like we're humans at the end of the day. And if we can find the middle ground between what that obsession is in terms of taxonomy for something that's grapes, we can find the same kind of obsession and care and love for each other as human people.
So I know that everyone on this call has been speaking about these issues to their own platforms forever. But the issue seems to have been raised as of last year with the George. Do you think things have actually changed, and do we actually have a meaningful dialogue on inclusion and diversity in wine at this point, or are people still going through performative motions?
Actually, I will say that for a very long time, I did not speak to it. I stayed a good girl and kept quiet and just kind of did my own thing. And it wasn't until, recent events that, I realized the cost of staying silent because, again, the problem is once they let you in, you feel so lucky and you feel so fortunate that they let you in, but you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to be the troublemaker. And anytime that I tried to sort of in the past, my history, in the wine industry goes back, 25 years. I started off when I was 18, 19 years old. I'm 44 now. And, for a long time, I just didn't want to get thrown out. And like I said, you just don't make a ruckus and you stay silent, you stay quiet. And like I said, you just, and like I said, those couple times where I tried pushing back, I immediately got labeled a troublemaker, a loose cannon. I mean, it's just like this, again, it's just this insidious messaging that you can't be who you need to be. But people who, quote unquote, fit the mold were free to just be a hot mess, But again, the double whammy of being a woman of color, oh, no, you don't get to do that. And so, I think that the journey comes from when you realize that for me, it's all about self-love. And it's about having that sort of understanding that, wait a minute, no, I do have contributions that I can make, that I do have value, and you can't do this anymore. And you set up these boundaries where, no, you cannot do this. And I really do have to thank the movement, and the Me Too movement, the racial reckoning in this country, for finally giving me the confidence and the courage to say enough is enough.
I just want to say that when your camera froze, it was like a beautiful shot of your face. You looked amazing.
That was it. Definitely.
So what we're asking people is, how has the conversation changed in the last year? And do we think we're finally at the point where we're having a real talk about diversity, or are people still going through performative actions?
So for me, there's been two kind of watershed moments for the last year, right? Clearly in June for George Floyd's murder, and then in November for the sexual harassment allegations for the court. Those two things in tandem kind of really showed wine systems and wine traditions that they haven't been paying attention. After the racial aftermath of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter as a bigger kind of global thing, I think people were finally putting that lens back to themselves in the wine industry for the first time in a long time. Although I would say that, even though there were some more kind of vocal supporters of being who you are in the space, that was never really emphasized. There was always an article, there was always a little talk of like, who's the next big Psalm, and there wasn't really ever a celebration of like the who. A lot of the time, it was always like, here's the institution, here's what they're doing, here's the way that they're moving forward with that. The thing came crashing down in November, when the institution itself was really kind of promoting all of these other things that were insidious, that were kind of tied back to white supremacy and patriarchy, right? It's this idea that men can do anything they want if they have the power structure, if they own the power dynamic, if they're the ones defining the rules. And so for us who have been kind of a little bit more vocal about it, it was just like, well, here's the example that we've been trying to tell you. Now it's affecting a lot of people that we know. And not just that, but people that we know who are getting hurt on a daily basis about, not just their mental health, but their emotional well-being, their social standing, all of that stuff came out to the forefront. It took the bravery of 21 women from the court to be able to say, hey, something's happening here. But at the same time, it took 21 women to finally talk to each other and expose everything else that was happening under all of that. In terms of performative or anything like that, I will say for conversations like this, to me, what's more important is always intent over speed. Although there's two things that should be examined, and it's that the speed should always match the intensity of that intent. So if we're going to be going as quickly and as fast and as hard as the change that we want, we should be galvanizing as many people into doing that as well. And then the second is that we can only get a little bit louder. There's nothing to lose if that's the case for any of us here in this call, really, if we keep speaking our truths. And I think that's one of the most important things to remember.
Thank you,
Jackie. It's really interesting. I love this conversation. I think that we're definitely making strides in the direction of becoming a truly more diverse industry. And I'm not just talking about the hospitality industry and the wine service industry. I'm really talking as well about the production industry and the industry of actually making wine as well. I think people are starting to think in a more diverse and straightforward manner as far as wine is concerned, and as far as the industry is concerned. One of the issues that I have is I feel like people sometimes do what I call box checking, where they, we're looking at our crew. We look like we're all one race, monoracial. We need to bring some other looks in here. Okay, that's fine, and that's really important, but that doesn't solve the problem in and of itself. We need to bring some companies like to say, oh, let me hire a diversity and inclusion officer, someone to think about this. Therefore, okay, now that we have one person working in the space of diversity and inclusion, we're good to go. That sort of checks our box and we're fine. One of the things that I really want to point out, and I really want to be clear about, is that to me, diversity in any industry is truly a lot of different opinions at the table. And if you want to be diverse, start from the top, start with a diverse sort of, head of HR who's doing the hiring, but then, allow those conversations to happen at the table and allow those unique descriptors of wine to be shared and to be shared openly. And if, I was tasting a Chardonnay that had a little bit of oak in it, quite a bit of oak in it, actually, a few years ago with a dear friend of mine from Guam. And he tasted the wine, and the first thing he said was taro root. So I think it's an obligation for a lot of us to learn what these flavors are and to be more eclectic in our own thinking when it comes to true inclusion and equity in the industry. And, not being afraid to walk up to it, if you're in the hospitality industry, which I'm not right now, to be able to walk up to a table and say, hey, where, if you don't mind me asking, where are you from? I heard you speaking a different language, or, just where are you from? Just out of curiosity. And then they tell you, and you kind of understand that culture, so it's both about us being included, but I really want to make this point that it's also about us being inclusive of everybody who we're working with, everybody who we serve, and making sure that we take that inclusion idea both for us, and that we take it and we allow ourselves, because this is a truly, we're trying to build a truly inclusive industry, that we also remind ourselves to be inclusive of everyone we work with. And that's just, it's just a really important thing to think about. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I'm colorblind. I don't know what people look like. I don't know what anyone looks like on this call. Everybody speaks good English. That's what I know. And fine. I don't, so I have this weird, not weird, but and I don't want to necessarily describe it as innocence, but I don't judge people based on what they look like. And that often comes as a surprise to people, but it's just, because for obvious reasons, I just want to talk about the topic, what we all care about. I don't look at you and think anything different of you, and I think that's kind of for me in this conversation, I think people are thinking more about inclusion of race and ethnicity, but I think people are doing well at it, but I still think people judge too much based on what someone looks like.
I think there's people that, right now when it comes to performative, I think that there are a lot of people that have great intentions, but I don't think that it's more powerful than the incentive accountability. Right. And, you know, particularly with the Court of Master Sommeliers, you know, I don't think that, this is just me personally, you know, sort of what I see is I don't think that the accountability is going to be there until there's an alternative to the court. Because the incentive then there is if we do not offer a program that is inclusive and safe and diverse, then they're going to go elsewhere. And so I think it's extremely important to have these competitive forces of choice. And right now, I don't think that the broader sommelier population, they're looking for a choice. And right now, their only choice is if they don't subscribe to the court and the way they're doing things, then what employers like, okay, so what do you do? Like, well, you know, I sort of have my own thing. Like, well, what is that thing? You know, I mean, the court, unfortunately, that title is a brand and it's a qualification, and we need to have an alternative to that so people can choose. And it's that nature of competitiveness that makes them accountable to the service of the people that are coming, you know, to get accredited and to basically course their life on this.
Hi, what's your experience then? What do you think about what's going on now?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with a lot of what's being said. I mean, especially what Alpana said about accountability. I was going to talk about, like, you know, yes, you know, a lot of people are acting quickly. A lot of people are acting with a lot of great intent. But then what's going on afterwards? What's going on, you know, a couple of months later? What, you know, are we checking up on them? You know, and are we continuing to hold these institutions, these businesses, these folks that are saying that they're going to try to make more inclusive, make it a more inclusive and diverse, you know, industry? Like that's what it comes down to. I think we're at that stage where, you know, we've had the conversations, we've talked about the points, everyone kind of understands the importance of these issues, but, you know, now the stage is what's next? What are we going to do? How are we going to achieve these goals? And who's going to be held accountable? If they're not being held accountable, then how are things going to move forward? Like, what's to prevent them from going back to how things were before? Now that they checked that box, they said that they've hired that, you know, diversity officer or formed that committee and so on and so forth, right? You know, so I think it's all of our responsibilities, everyone that's, you know, on this call, but also the people that are watching us, you know, talk about this, you know, to hold those institutions and so forth accountable for what they say they're going to do and how they're going to deliver on it. And continue to challenge that. You know, I think that's the biggest thing is continue to challenge, continue to push, and, you know, continue to ask for more. And I think that's very fair for any of us to ask, you know, for those people that we look at or we hold up to a high standard, to continue to keep them at that high standard.
Right.
You know, and I don't want to make this a court bashing session. That's not it. But I'm just speaking my truth because these things actually happen. You know, but a few months right after the George Floyd incident, you know, we had you know, about a back and forth within the court to create, you know, to basically put out a statement. And within that, a group of my colleagues and I, you know, got together and we basically put out a manifesto of like, this is what needs, you know, we think should happen. And one of them was the idea to form a diversity committee, which was my idea. And, you know, it immediately, when we first presented it, it was not well received. There was some like mixed reaction, like really, and actually a person who's on the diversity committee wrote an email to the members at large and said he was greatly offended by it and said that how quickly we bite the hand that feeds us. That person's on the diversity committee now, by the way. And so after it happened, after the George Floyd incident happened, you know, it was Tahira. It was Tahira's story about being—
They act like masters, didn't they?
You know, being, you know, stand up and refer to us as master. You know, and when that story went out, immediately the diversity committee got formed. And I asked to be on it 3 times and was rejected 3 times. And this was just last year. Sorry, go ahead.
Who was the first woman of color to be a master sommelier?
It was me. And it wasn't, you know, my ego. And I'm frustrated by this. And it wasn't from a place of ego. It's actually from a place of, listen, I have a lot of experience here. You know, I've been dealing with the court since 1997. That's when I first took my exam in 97. And I feel like I can bring a lot of value and insight, you know, to the table to see what it is like from the perspective of a person of color, but was rejected. You know, and they said they wanted to keep the diversity committee small so they could stay nimble. I said, so basically the diversity committee is forming with an act of exclusion. So I'll just put that out there.
I wanted to comment real quickly on what Alpana said about like biting the hand that feeds you, because that was kind of like a big thing that I came to realization this past year, is that I was for a long time happy with what I was given. I was happy with the situations I was given, the opportunities I was given, and so forth, and not giving myself enough credit for the fact that I worked my butt off to get to those places. And it had to do with me, not because of the fact that I was given these opportunities or that I was, granted these chances, and that was kind of a big part of like, as I went through, accreditation and so forth, as I pursued, trying to get a master's sommelier pin and so forth. I thought that I needed that to be valid in this industry. And I think that, that's that mentality, is kind of wrong. I think I still know a lot of my peers that still feel that they need this type of thing to validate their role and their position in the industry. And I think part of this discussion we're talking about equity, talking about inclusion, and so forth, is kind of dismantling that mentality, breaking down that thought or that perspective that you have to achieve these accreditations or pieces of paper or pieces of metal in order for your thoughts and opinions to be valuable, or your contributions to be respected in the industry that we're in. I think they can only add to the story, but ultimately it is up to the individual. And the more we try to embrace and the more we make our industry more welcoming to these individuals, the better off we're going to be.
I think one of the other things that we have to consider is that, especially as people of color, and how you touched on this a little bit, is that paying our dues means having to be better 300%. And that's the hardest part, is that, in order for us to kind of get to the level of like a mediocre person in the industry, we have to work so much harder. And not just because of how we look, and I think it's especially because of that, but I think all the other kind of overlays of, the structures that are against us to begin with, right? We're so happy to be given scraps when we deserve way more than what we actually do, and for the expertise that we do have, and the experience that we bring along with that expertise, right? It's not just the book knowledge that we bring, it's the book knowledge along with the people who we are in terms of how we've carried ourselves in our lives. That's what you're paying us for. And I think it's nighttime that we've demanded as much. So
it's a common Asian trope that you bow your head down, right, and you stay silent. Certainly within the South Asian community, as long as we're making money, we're fine. Right? It's like, it's the mentality that I grew up with. And it's interesting because I know that this conversation can seem a little daunting of like, how do we overcome this, right? And I remember talking to a woman from the New York Times article, and I said, "What does resolution look like for you?" And she says, "I just want to burn it all down." And I said, "Well, that may not happen because there's too many powerful forces that still want to see this institution exist because they're making money from it, they're making a livelihood from it. But there is nothing stopping you from dismantling it in your mind and how you choose to engage with it. And you can do that now. There's power in that."
So let's talk about this. Between George Floyd and COVID, all of the tables got overturned in the last year. And the first thing people said was, how do we go back to normal? And I personally am not one to help reset a table where I was never welcome. What do the new tables that we want to make, what do they look like? Who's going to be there? And how do we establish something that is actually, how do we get rid of the need for gates as gatekeepers?
They're in another restaurant. The tables are in another restaurant. They're round, they're communal. And it's big. It's really, really big. And it might be hard to get a lot more food to those folks, but you know what? At least everybody's on the same page when it comes to waiting. I think that's what we have to kind of, if we're going to continue with that metaphor, it's like we have to build the restaurant from scratch. We can't say yes to the entirety of like what we used to before in terms of something that's normal, quote unquote, because like we know now, especially with the structures that have been exposed because of COVID and because of George Floyd and because of all of these other things that have happened, that those tables weren't sound to begin with. I don't want to eat in a restaurant that's like riddled in asbestos. You know what I mean? Like I want a place that's going to care for me.
What I would say here too, which is I think this is just very true. We often have historically have tried for a seat at the pre-existing table and sort of scratched our way up to that seat. Okay, come on, how can we get up here? And some people have felt, not like they've been given equal treatment. I totally understand that. So I think what our job is now is to build the tables ourselves. We are building the tables. That is the point of groups like the Lift Collective. That's the point of everything we're doing, is we are recreating those tables that we can sit at, and we can sit at them with pride and hold our heads high and be super proud of what we do.
I think that the table should be built. I mean, the restaurant industry is an endangered species. And as a restaurant owner myself, I mean, between all of the forces that are coming together, I mean, I don't know what role the sommelier is going to have in a traditional setting. The dirty secret in our industry is that there's a sense of scarcity of opportunity when it comes to jobs. And I think that's why there's that tendency to kind of like turn on each other, because we're all chasing after, these very few. It's like the game of musical chairs. We just kind of push each other out of the way. There aren't a lot of jobs. And then not to mention that these are jobs that fulfill you, that fulfill your sense of purpose in life, that you want to sort of like send message, and then also make money and make a living, make a fair living, and I have to tell you, I mean, there aren't a lot of jobs. How many restaurants run a pretty significant wine program where they can afford, an $80,000, $90,000 a year sommelier? So, kind of thinking from that angle. And I don't think that the industry, particularly the court, and this is something I've brought up several times, does a good enough job of explaining, because I guess the idea is that I spend thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, basically steer my life for 10 years. And then I come out of it, I'm like, oh, wait, so I go work for a distributor now, and so the expectation of like, I'm going to be a rock star is not necessarily that of a rock star. It's like a traveling salesman, right? And if that's what you want to do, and it's a good life and you can provide for your family, good for you. I'm not saying it's a horrible thing, but does your expectation match what you think is going to be on the other side of the so-called rainbow? So building this table from entrepreneurship, because I think that right now in particular, there's never been a better time to embrace your own authenticity, to leverage the power of technology in terms of Instagram, and TikTok, and basically to find your circle of competence. And it's about, what do you love? Are you passionate about? What story do you want to tell? And your tribe will find you. And when you can bring that tribe to the table, trust me, people are going to want to listen to you.
We're almost out of time, so let's go around the room. For the people who've tuned in today to listen to this, if you could give them one bit of advice, either to make the space for themselves or to make our industry more diverse, what would you tell them?
I'll start. Everything that you need to be successful in the wine business, you have it in you right now. As you are, there is nothing wrong with you, and just begin where you are and speak your truth, speak your authenticity, go with what you love, and you will find your platform. And once you get there, be as loud as possible.
It's not what the title bestows on you, it's what you bestow on the title.
Exactly. When you look at these incredible master sommeliers, the Bobby Stuckeys and, the Richard Betts, former master sommelier, they're who they are because they're just cool people, and they brought value to the title. The title did not bring value to them, and so you don't need a title to be great.
Miguel, I saw you had a thought.
I mean, something to echo a little bit about what Alpana said is that, self-preservation is self-care. I can't help you if you can't help yourself first. Yeah. And 100% of that is kind of accepting who you are as a person. It's taken me this long to kind of be really comfortable appending the word American after my identities. It's taken me this long to fully embrace the Filipino half of that too. And it's taken me even longer to consider myself a New Yorker, even though I've been here 15 years. So for me, it's kind of understanding that everybody's personal journeys take a long time for them to figure themselves out. But as soon as you have that, and I think that that's the most wonderful gift that you can show other people, is that you living your life is the most powerful thing that you can do in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's because you've just included everyone else in it.
Hoby, hi.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, as we're trying to again talk about equity, inclusion, and so on and so forth, and try to create a better industry than what we were greeted with when we came into the industry. I think the most important thing is to continue to if you're trying to create that world for yourself and for those around your peers, continue to listen. Continue to take the time to listen to your peers, other people of different backgrounds and so forth. But at the same time, find ways to amplify those voices, find ways to, bring those voices to the foreground. Because a lot of times, we're in the background shouting and no one's listening, we just need someone to help us bring us to the foreground. So just continue to listen, take the time. And then at the same time, if it resonates with you, continue to just amplify those voices and let those voices be heard.
What we don't amplify, we erase. Hoby,
100%.
It's not what it looks like. When you look at a red wine versus a white wine sitting on the table, do you think you can tell me all about those wines just by what they look like, just by walking by the table and saying, yeah, it's red? Can you describe that red wine? No, you have to pick it up. You have to stick your nose in it. You have to taste it. You have to experience it. You have to understand it as a beverage that you're tasting, as something that we can talk about. We can't talk about wines just based on what they look like. We can't do the same thing with people. So often we look at someone and we judge them based on what their skin color looks like, based on their weight, based on their gender. It's not what it looks like. You have to, just like you do with wine, you have to sit down and you have to get to know people and understand who they are and why they are where they are and experience them in the same way that we want to get to know wine as a sommelier or a master of wine. We want to do the same thing with people, because when we do that, when we don't judge books by their cover, we become so much more aware and so much more inclusive as we go through life and we go through society. And one quick corollary to that is just to say that creating common ground is forgetting about what things look like and really sitting down and having a conversation.
On that note, I want to thank all of you, Hoby, Alpana, hi, Miguel, for the conversation today. I'm looking forward to when COVID is over, together and sharing a glass with you all. And I'm looking forward to making a more inclusive and a better world together. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Cheers. Thank you.
You're not only an ally, you're an accomplice. So thank you for being an accomplice.
I'm driving the getaway car.
Thank you all.
The getaway driver, love it. Thank you. Thank you, Philip Coffee, for having us.